because I have some questions and I'm sure you can provide great and wonderful insight. And I think other people will find a lot of value in this. So I'm glad that we're able to, make this time. And I appreciate you taking the time to, sit down with me and just chat for a little bit.
Sure. And no pressure on me, I guess, to answer the
No, no,
questions.
no pressure on you at all. But I did. I'm gonna. What I'll do is I'm gonna intro the show, and then I obviously will just chat for a little bit before we dive into all the crazy stuff. But this is very interesting because I have not seen you in a very long time. Five years, easy. Has to be
I think
yeah.
so. Yeah.
It's at least that because I've been in Seattle for that long, and I haven't seen you since whatever the last time I would have seen you at Planet Fitness would have been, which is crazy long ago. So,
Yeah.
I want to talk just like quickly about how like we actually know each other because like in 2020, most people when they're recording interviews and sessions, like they probably don't actually know the people that they're talking with. It's just conversation. So it's actually cool to do an interview with someone I know. And you have a PhD. This shit is crazy. So I'm very impressed by you, and like this is a topic that I'm very passionate about because like I'm somebody who recognizes my own mental health struggles on a day to day basis. So this is gonna be awesome. So I really appreciate you.
Well, I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah.
And obviously, I follow your pages with the memes. That's probably my main source of of memes that I can disperse to other people.
Yep. People people wonder why don't you use your real name? And I'm like, well, I mean, Nick is cool, but the page is just nothing but memes. It's barely me, so it might as
Yeah.
well just be Memechel Jackson. I love Michael Jackson's music, and I remember it probably was like 7 years ago. I found this random picture of him sitting on top of like the hood of a Benz wearing like some retro Jordan ones. It's like photoshopped, but I was like, yo, this shit is fire. It's like a young Michael Jackson. Like it was crazy, and I was like, I love this. And it was my Facebook profile picture for mad long. And then one day I was just like, I'm so tired of just like like my name just always popping up. I'm over it. I need something new. It's time to revamp this stuff. And I was like getting really like into the memes like crazy long ago. And then there was the rest is history, man. So, and that brings us to this, and that's why I have this show. This is the Memechel Jackson Show, and now it's lunchtime TV since I do it Wednesdays during the lunchtime. Um, my show went from being 2 hours, 3 days a week as a radio show to now it's just this little mini podcast thing that I do. But here on this show we do but I always say we because I do have people on from time to time, but I try to bring people on who are also big advocates for mental health, self-care, and protecting the lives of everyone, not just the select few or the people around them. Like I feel like you have to really be invested in people, and care about people in order to understand and you know kind of be able to, I don't know. It's tough to connect with people if you don't get like what people are going through, and
Yeah.
if you don't even try to put yourself in their place and have that understanding, like it's impossible to really maintain relationships. At least in my opinion. And so I feel like when we talk about mental health and like self care and all the important things that go along with that, like I've it really has over the last couple of years like put me in a space where I have to do a lot of like reflecting and like checking on myself and being like am I just doing all the stuff that I just the little things that I know, little techniques, and just making sure I'm doing breathing stuff and like woosah and just the little things, and then like as you get older you start to understand more, and then you meet people who actually are like fully invested in all the details of this, and have invested the time going to school and earning the degrees and being able to really help people, and I've been wanting to have someone on this show who can provide us that insight. And what are the chances it's somebody I already know? So for anyone who's watching this, I actually met McKenna this probably about 7 years
7 years
ago.
ago?
Yeah, it's probably seven,
Yeah.
8 years ago. And it was because she worked at Planet Fitness, and that's where I
Hmm.
started going to the gym. I I was not a gym guy. Planet Fitness was the perfect place for me because what are some of their things, their little slogans like no judgment and all these things, and they really nice people. Well, some of them, not everybody. But McKenna, you were one of the real ones. I appreciated you because I could tell you kept it real. You weren't, it wasn't fake, annoying ass customer service like you walking up behind people while they're working out and scaring the shit out of them and asking if they need towels and stuff. It wasn't no shit like that. I always appreciated your vibe. And then you and I, like, we kind of clicked and we chatted and all that type of stuff. And it was cool. And we just kind of became friends. And then I just moved the hell away. I honestly had no idea that in this entire time that you had been. I mean, I knew you were grinding it out with school. You had always been doing that, and you're a really hard worker, and you just get after it. But I had no idea that you were doing all this stuff to get you to here. So tell me about what the last 7 or 8 years have been like, and how you ended up with a PhD.
Oh, yeah. So Planet Fitness, actually during that time, I had probably 2 or 3 jobs, I think.
Yeah, I
But
remember you working.
two jobs were on campus. So I was going to University of West Florida. I was getting my master's there. So I'd already gotten my bachelor's. And so probably the realness was partly because that's just who I am, but also I was exhausted all the time. It's a tough program, but it's a good program there. So people who are thinking about getting a master's in psychology, and if you live in Pensacola, go for it, because I went for counseling, but I think people don't realize this. There are, I don't know, almost 100 different specializations in psychology. Only about 3 do therapy. The
Oh
rest do like
shit.
research. Yeah, they have sports psych, which you'd probably find really interesting. So helping people get into flow, which I don't know a lot about. It's not my area, but basically like getting into that state where you can perform really well in sports. We have
Oh,
police
okay.
psychology now, forensic psychology. Like there's so many different areas of psychology. And so I went into counseling, but UWF has a few others. And then I moved to Oklahoma, which I think has like 15 people living there. And I finished my PhD
Oh my
in
gosh.
counseling psychology. So that
That's
took
lit.
me 4 years.
Did you go to Oklahoma or?
I went to Oklahoma State. Yeah.
Okay, good. The better of
Yeah.
the two. As a Texas Longhorn fan, being I gotta let you know that my sister and
Ah.
my mom live in San Antonio, but we lived in Austin for a lot of our life. So I'm a big Longhorn fan. So anything Oklahoma, that's why I just was laughing like that because Oklahoma's weak. Shout out to anybody that said
Yeah.
Oklahoma, but still, y'all are weak. But oh yeah, Oklahoma State, I can get on board with the Cowboys. They all right with me.
Yeah. They also cannot make sweet tea appropriately, but that's
Oh,
a whole other story.
terrible.
I know, it's an art. I can't imagine where you're living. I have a few friends living in Washington, and I'm like, you guys don't get like
uh,
real stuff,
no,
food, do
I need
you?
like that Milo's or something, but they don't think they have that out here. That's a delicacy back in the South out
Hmm.
here. Yeah, it's non-existent.
Yeah. Sorry, my cat's on the way here.
Okay,
But
what's
yeah,
up,
so
cats?
she's my therapy cat. So yeah, I basically spent 11 years total in school.
11
Um,
years, y'all hear that? 11 years. This is commitment. That's what I love about this. 11 years. It's crazy.
yes. We do not get paid nearly as much as like a physician does. But that's why a lot of physicians go into medicine instead of psychology.
Yeah.
So yeah, I work at a VA now, but I've worked in corrections. I actually worked at the Escambia County Jail for a year,
Okay.
and I worked with college students. I worked in a children's hospital. Um, yeah, I worked in a lot of
Yeah,
different
so you really
settings.
made the rounds, yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds like obviously you work with people of different ages, genders, all these things. So it gives you vast knowledge and perspective on like the different ways in which people tend to struggle and how they handle that, deal with it, and progress within that. All that. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I specialize in a few areas. So one is serious mental illness. So schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe trauma. I also specialize in basically anything that's complicated. So kind of like Dr. House, when people don't know what's going on, they send me the case and try to figure out what's going on. The
Oh,
other one,
okay.
yes, I've had some pretty intense cases that were really difficult to figure out. And the other one is culturally responsive therapy. So, like you said, there are a lot of factors in a person that really affect how therapy can work for them,
Yeah.
how if they're not doing well, their symptoms may look different, the treatment may look different. And truthfully, we don't do the best job with that. We've been saying for, I don't know, a couple of decades now that we're not doing a great job, but we're taking baby steps to actually improve that. You know, there's still um, racism that happens in mental health that's a lot more subtle. Of course, in medicine, there is, you know, sexism, ageism, ableism, all those things still pop up in
Yeah.
therapy, but I think it's trying to find the right therapist and also the right fit. You know, like sometimes I like to compare it to finding a barber. I think a lot of people think it's like going to a
That's
physician
interesting.
where it's, yeah, like if you go to a physician, it's usually like very top down. Like, I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you what's wrong with you. And that works for them, right? In
Yeah.
therapy, there's there's so many variables, and so you really should be in charge of your treatment plan. And so I like to say it's like going to a barber. You know, I can give you suggestions just like your barber can about like what, ooh, that may not look good on you, but at the end of the day, you're paying them, so they're going to do it.
Yeah, that's true.
um and you may have a barber that like works better for you, and then you may have had some that didn't work as well for you just because of fit or their experiences or whatever, and that's
Yeah.
fine. And so that's how I like to view therapy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. It truly is like a relationship. I think some of my, like, I have, last year I did attend some sessions with a really nice lady, and I felt like she helped me progress in some things. But some of my hesitancy with like really diving in and investing in my own mental health obviously is like the cost when you can't get approved for good health
Yeah.
care, which is a struggle that I'm having right now. Literally, I've had a bad week because these people keep giving me the runaround. They're like basically telling me I make too much money to qualify for all the services that I need to get it for like free, which isn't a problem. But then they're like, but you also will just need to pay us this crazy amount per month. And I'm like, fam, I don't make that much money. And this is
Yeah.
the state of Washington. Everything's crazy expensive. But it's also some of the fact that like I'm weary about just like talking to someone. Like I want to feel like this is something we can both kind of like. We're gonna get in the car and we're gonna take the trip together, not like I'm just pulling up and talking to you through the window. Because like you said, like when you get a barber, like my boy James, who's been on my show before, and he's on my page, and my other friend Hernan, they've been two people that have cut my hair, and then my homegirl Erin back in Pensacola. Three people ever besides myself, and then one other person when I was young, leading up until the time that I learned how to cut my own hair. Like it's that serious. So like when you say that, I'm like, yeah, that's why I haven't gone to get an actual therapist just yet, because I'm like, I want to make sure that you and I can have a relationship before I start, unloading and giving all my personal info, because
Yeah.
like that, this stuff is, it really is serious, and I didn't realize it until later in life. Being now I'm 34, and I'm like, fuck, man, I do feel like I'm behind is in regards to like getting some of this stuff taken care of, because I realized how strong of an impact it has on my day-to-day life. And I think some people really believe like, oh, just get over it, or just it'll just be okay. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way for people. Like I didn't realize some of the struggles that I had, like with anxiety, and just my overall, like how my mood is affected by just the thoughts that I have, and like how my brain tries to trick me into things, like thinking things are negative when they probably are not, like forcing you to overthink. And it's like, you do not realize that there are millions upon millions of people who are having these troubles every single day. And a lot of people just are, they kind of just dismiss it. And I'm like, this stuff is crazy. So you really have to, like, you have to feel comfortable to take that step. Like, I mean, I was shaking just going through the door last year when I met with that lady. She was wonderful too. It wasn't even a big deal. It's like any interaction that you think you got. Like, if you can talk to somebody in the grocery store, or if I can go play basketball with people, why can't I go to therapy? I'm like, it just is different. It's different for everybody. So yes, this is. I'm very interested to hear more about a lot of, like, this specific specialties that you have and like what you like most about them. So like, which one's like your favorite one?
Um, yeah, I people consult with me probably the most about really complicated cases when they can't figure out what's going on, whether it's therapy or they're doing an assessment with someone.
Yeah.
Um, but I also really like culturally sensitive care. I also really like keeping my field in check. I think that that's really important. I think both medicine and mental health, that's why I have my podcast, Revealing the Ivory Tower. There's very much like a
Stuff.
pedestal, like, we know exactly what we're doing, but
Yeah.
we don't know why antidepressants work. We don't actually technically know what causes mental illness in a lot of ways. It's complicated. And so I feel like we need to take a couple of steps back, humble ourselves a little bit. But yeah, I think the culturally responsive care is important. So for example, I have a whole clinic where I talk to people who've experienced discrimination, whether like any type of discrimination.
Yeah.
And so I get to be more creative in that clinic than I normally do. So
Okay.
I've incorporated Lovecraft Country in my sessions.
What
I'm
is
going to
that?
make an Oh, it's so good. Okay, so it's based on the Lovecraft novels, so like the Cthulhu universe, but they made this series on
I don't know what
HBO.
that
It
is.
is nerdy. Okay, I'm just gonna.
Oh, I've seen a. I see. I know what you're talking about. I've seen that
Yes,
preview. Yeah.
but
Okay.
they set it in the Jim Crow era, and so that population was totally left out of like the original stories, and so there's a lot of really powerful references in that
Okay.
show. They
Might have to
talk about
check that out.
intergenerational. Yeah, definitely do it. It's really powerful. There are definitely some episodes and moments that are more difficult to watch than others, but for the most part, what I've heard is that it's really empowering. Some people have called it therapeutic. There are some references in there like Black Wall Street, Emmett Till. They reference intergenerational trauma as a result of slavery. So there's a lot in there,
Yeah.
and yeah, and I think X-Men's a great example of discrimination and racism and stuff like that. So I'm hoping to start a group for that. So yeah, it's both. It's I
X-Men.
like
You mean like the Marvel stuff? Is that what you just said?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That actually is. I've tried to tell people for years, like growing up on those comics, like I was always like, why do these people hate these people? And I always would say, this is like how Native Americans was getting treated, how black people get treated. And people be
yeah,
like, nah, it's just a comic. I'm like, no, it's not. They're literally being told they can't be amongst the other people because they're different. They're being discriminated against. People are like, nah, it's just a comic. They have powers. It's cool. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not, but you
yeah.
don't
I
see it yet.
there's yeah, there's a little more depth to that. And yeah, so I really enjoy both. I
Yeah,
like
that's
being
cool.
able to try to help people figure out what's going on, and that piece too,
Yeah.
the cultural pieces.
And that's awesome. That's really important because I feel like I had when I was young, I think my mom and my dad tried to take me to like get some services. I think that was kind of more connected with school and all that type of stuff, but I would say like, growing up and like as I phased into life, I was never really offered the opportunity to sit and talk with somebody as like a therapy. Usually with me, they're like, "Oh, you're cussing too loud. You're suspended. You're getting in a fight. We just called the cops. You're suspended." Like no one was ever like, maybe we should just, And even if they
Mhm.
did offer it, I'm sure I probably was just a punk ass resistant kid, but it definitely like therapy was not something that was at the forefront of my mind growing up when you think about dealing with problems and conflict. And then all this type of stuff. Like, it's not until later in life when the internet takes over and then all this stuff is just thrown in your face. But also at the same time, people now feel more comfortable more than ever coming out and being like, hey, I struggle. Here are the steps that I've taken. I care about you all as people, and I would like you to take these same steps. Here are hotlines. Here's even just an awareness post, and the check on your strong friends. Like, now we have more of those things, so it puts more of an emphasis on mental health and taking care of ourselves. But I have always felt that, like, at least in the household that I grew up in, like, my mom does go to therapy and she has been for some time, but again, not until later in life as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, that's just not an option for us. Everything is just like, you just deal with it. And I think that's why I
Right.
probably struggle now, because I just am somebody who, people bother me, piss me off, I was like, all right, fine. All right, fine. All right, fine. And then it like turns into, and then I'm on there being like, you motherfuckers done tried me. And like, now we gotta, and it doesn't ever need to be all that. Never. But I don't understand that it's okay to be like, hey, this bothered me. And I've gotten better about it now, but for the longest time, I would never just be like, hey, this really bothered me. And also understand that you just have to, like, throw it out into the air, and you have to be okay, understand that people just have to accept it. And that actually does put me in a better space now. But I wish I would have known that technique when I was young. But when I was young, I just wanted to rumble, because you don't know how to, like, deal with any of that stuff. And, like, therapy just was never a thing. So now I'm like fascinated by it, but also scared of it. Like, this stuff scares me more than like swimming with sharks, mainly because I know I'm never going to do that. But this is something that I'm like, I need to do. But it's like being on like the edge, like looking over and you're like, oh shit, what if we fall? You don't know what's gonna happen, so you don't want to really go out there yet. But it's still fascinating.
I think that's why therapy is so scary, right? It's a pretty intimate relationship in the sense of you're really vulnerable, and
Yeah.
it's a one-sided relationship, right? It's not like you're talking to a friend and that friend's going to reciprocate a lot and share a lot of themselves.
Yeah.
You're seeking a service, and so it's this kind of new experience where you're sharing a lot about yourself.
Yeah.
When you go to a physician, maybe sometimes you're sharing some pretty intense stuff, but a lot of times it's like, oh, okay, I have a cold, so I need to go to the doctor. Like, I have an infection, like I need to get an antibiotic. That's not super vulnerable.
Yeah.
But with therapy, yeah, it absolutely is. And there's definitely stigma among certain communities about going to get therapy. Like you said, a lot more people talk about it now. I think Generation Z has done like a great job of just, yeah, I talked to my therapist today. Here's what we talked about.
Yeah. People are more
That's
open
great.
about it.
Yeah. But I also, there is stigma. I also think that stigma is warranted because of the history of medicine, the history of what my field used to do to people. And so certainly there's like a focus on being able to suck it up, right? As a culture in the United States, we really value, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, right? Being able to suck it up. But if it was that simple, we'd all just do it and we'd be fine.
Yeah.
That's what she said.
We are both big Office
works,
fans, if you haven't noticed.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it is crazy to think about that. And then we also, especially in America, we do everything we can to scare the shit out of people as often as we can. We make them pay for that through entertainment. So like, people from my community, when 4 or 5 years ago we see a movie like Get Out comes out, and you're just like, oh hell no, like, I'm not getting anywhere close to any of these people that are gonna do no voodoo shit on me. Because isn't that how it starts? He sits in that chair, she starts doing her little techniques, and then bam, you're in a daze. Like we really think crazy shit like that. That's probably why we need to go to therapy. But when you see like stuff like that, and then all your life you hear all the stories, and you're like, don't talk to people, and especially as a man, it's like, you gotta be tough. Like, it's so much stuff, and it's like, I'm proud now that I get to see other people who are like, yeah, we don't care about any of that. We would just like to just kind of talk about how we're feeling, feel like we're in a safe space, and feel like we're progressing to a better tomorrow. It doesn't have to be all this like crazy extra stuff. And then even thinking about like with the field of medicine and how it used to work for certain communities versus others, and some of the horrible terrorizing things that they would do to people. You hope that now we're in a place where there are just so many people that do care and value all people, that we're starting to get away from that and people are actually just helping people. Because some of this stuff, like I was even thinking yesterday, like think about what a trip it is that for even for you, you spent 11 years getting to this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
To retain knowledge, to share with other people, to help other people because you want to help other people. Why do we make people jump through hoops just to share knowledge? What's the point of that? We should just share this stuff. And if you want to leave legacy and then build for a better tomorrow, you should want to share the knowledge so that way everybody has it. That way this ship continues going in the right direction. But people want to hoard knowledge and resources and all of these things, and it all can go back to having a real serious impact on the mental health of many people walking this earth. And that's all this stuff is just crazy to me.
Yeah, it's the same thing with research too. I mean, the entire point of doing research, whether it's medicine, political science, psychology, whatever it is to serve the public.
Yeah.
But the public generally doesn't have access to most of these scientific journals because they charge money for you to be able to read it.
Yeah.
And so,
that's so
right.
weird.
So the results are not reaching the people that like would benefit from this or read it. And so that depends on like the provider that you have, or like if you go to college and you have access, like there's a lot of gates that are put up and barriers for people to be able to, and even if you do have access, some of the studies are just so dry. Like they use so much jargon that are in their field that no one can understand it.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a PhD and sometimes I'm reading articles in psychology and I'm like, what? I have to take multiple breaks. And so even if you have access, there's also like, I can't even understand what I'm reading. And so there's both of those issues too, because I think if people learned how to critique research in a really good way, like with a what we call a healthy skepticism, then I think people could receive a lot more benefit. I mean, there's so much research out there, and there's some databases for sure that are free. Like you can go on Google Scholar, National Institute of Health, National Institute of Mental Health. There are different places where you can get things for free, and I definitely suggest going there. But again, there's also this gap in understanding because the people that are writing a lot of these studies, the way they write it, they're catering it to other people in their field as opposed to the public.
Yeah, and that is always, like I said, it's just crazy to me because everything that we do, obviously, I'm not trying to get dark, but everything we do is temporary. Everything you're doing is temporary. It's to provide this temporary relief, and you hope that this person can recreate this type of moment every day until their last day, because obviously we're not here forever. Tomorrow's never promised, all these types of things. But you have these communities that literally, if they could come out of the places that we shame them for being in, if they just had more resources, like why do we not share these things? Do you think that stuff is done on purpose, especially like through medicine? Like, because they could write it differently. Like, why not transcribe all the data that you've gotten and then just like, just apply the more basic terminology to it and then just toss it on the internet so people can see? Like, why don't they do that?
I think there are a few reasons. One is people want to be published in peer-reviewed journals, meaning that when I go to submit a study that I've written, I want to get published, right? Like that gives me a lot of clout, but also I want people to read my research.
Yeah.
So it has a lot more prestige if I go through this process, because what happens is I'll submit my study and then a few people that are experts in whatever I'm studying will review my study, and they decide if it's automatically accepted or if they'll accept it if you revise some pieces of it, or it's just outright rejected.
Gotcha.
And so that's the tough piece. I mean, really, academia or universities are the big driver of research, because that brings in a lot of money to the universities. And so they write grants and stuff like that. And so you're not going to get as much clout or money if you don't publish in these journals, basically.
Gotcha.
Because, yeah, it basically builds on your reputation. And that's a tricky part too, because once you publish it, this is the really kind of messed up part, it's no longer your work. And so you can't technically share that article anymore. It's the publisher that owns it in
Oh,
that journal
okay.
now. Yeah. So you can talk about it for sure. Like you can talk
Yeah.
about it, like go present, but you can't just go freely throwing around this article depending on the journal, because now the publisher owns it, not you.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that makes sense.
I'm not saying it's fair.
No,
I
no, definitely. I
hate the
understand what you're saying.
process. Yeah.
And I get it
It's a
because,
lot of
like,
money.
yeah, and because, like, it's, I mean, in the end, the person who's putting in the effort to get to this point, like, they're still a person who is trying to set themselves up for success and for a brighter tomorrow and all these things. So, like, and I understand, like, within any given role, craft, or anything you do, there are certain things that you're going to have to do to get to certain places that you may not like. And so I'm sure these people aren't like, not all of them are like purposely being like, F these, lower class and more poor communities and, people of color. We're just going to hoard all this. I'm only going to give it to my rich friends. I mean, I'm sure there are people that do that for sure, but I'm sure not everybody is like thinking purposely doing that to people. But that's unfortunate that there are groups and entities that will take that work and then just be like, all right, thanks, you did a great job. We're gonna hold this, here, and we're just not gonna show it to anybody. And then, Trump's kids get health care for a lifetime, and then, like, these 5 kids over here, like, they're gonna suffer for the rest of their lives. And a lot of it is just because they just don't know. Not even because they don't have something. They have it. The people have literally provided it, but they won't actually tell you how to get it. Like, hey, there's treasure over here. Just figure out how to get it. But they, like, give them the map, the fucking treasure. They just do it for those types of people. So, it's very interesting.
Unintentional, but I would say the harm, like, I don't think it matters. Like, the harm is still the same. It's the same, like, I'm hoarding resources, kind of like you said. The other piece is that a lot of the people actually driving the research are grad students.
Yeah.
And so there may be a few professors that have like a lab set up, or like there are students researching together like the same topic or a similar topic, and they get paid very little or not at all, but they want to do it because it makes you look better. And so there's again, like, research is really important. I think it's just the way that we're going about it is really problematic. And it's not reaching the people that it needs to reach. There's also publication bias. So especially in my field over medicine and some other fields. So hot topics are more likely to be accepted in journals. Statistically significant results are more likely to be accepted. So, like, if I find that there's a connection or something causes something else, that's more likely to be accepted into a journal than there's no connection here, which sounds like, okay, that should be the case. But sometimes it's kind of important to know that there is not a correlation. For example, vaccines not causing autism. We want to emphasize that there's not a link there. And so I think that's actually missing too, is we're not studying these things that actually aren't related.
Yeah,
or we do, and we find the result and we just don't submit it to a journal.
And now I really see what you're saying. Like, people, sometimes it sounds like people are taking the shortcuts.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's a bummer. What do you think needs to happen for us to get past that and then start to really allocate the knowledge and the resources that we have to everybody?
I think that's tricky because I think that involves money, because that's really what drives it, right? The
Yeah.
journals make a lot of money. And so
Money
they're
is
not
everything.
so they're not going to want to. And then the universities, their funding gets cut, right? And so if they get a grant, the expectation is you're going to get this published and you're going to present it.
Yeah.
And so I think there would have to be a change in how everything is funded. You know, the National Institute of Health, the National Institute of Mental Health, like they get government funding. Like that's why you can look up stuff on these databases for free. Like you could Google it right now and look up stuff on any .gov site, really, and that's free because the government funds it, right? Well, we fund it too through taxpayer money. And so I think, I'm not really sure what the answer is, but it would definitely have to involve essentially where people are getting the funding from, because that's the big piece. If you're just chasing profit for the sake of profit, I don't think there's anything wrong with chasing profit, right?
Yeah.
But
gotta make money.
Yes, if you're doing that, you know, and it's costing other people resources and stuff like that, then I think it needs to be examined and it's a problem. And so then comes in the whole aspect of the ivory tower, right? Where there's kind of this elitist attitude. I've been in, you know, I'm so educated and published and whatever, and I haven't left my research lab in like 20 years. And there's just kind of this disconnect. And I think, you know, people get so focused sometimes, you know, not just in the clout, but like they're really focused on their work, and it can be really important, but they're also losing the fact of, okay, who am I actually publishing for?
Yeah.
You know, you could go out of your way to go on podcasts, right? You could go out of your way to verbally like present the information in a way that people can understand.
Yeah, for sure.
But you're not going to get paid for that a lot of times, because if you go to a conference, it's with your peers. Like, so again, it's just the same echo chamber, and it's not getting to the people that it needs to get to. And so, at least on our end, I think that we should go more out of our way to post at least like summaries on our work in total. You know, we may not be able to publish or talk about like specifics of an article because we don't own it anymore, depending on the journal, but I think we can at least talk about the topic in general on social media, on podcasts, like whatever the case is, being a keynote speaker, I don't know, somewhere, like involving yourself more in your community. I think on our end, that's what we could do, and that's doable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have so many ways and outlets for people to communicate. Like, I mean, you and I, we're doing this right now. I have shows, you have a show, you work a job. Like, where you're able to communicate these things through many aspects of your life on a day-to-day basis. So it is interesting that there would be people who would be in this profession, which you hope that they got into it with the intention to help people, but now they've just been in it for so long and they've just been chasing the work for so long that they've forgotten how to actually connect with the people that they started out helping. Like, it's like you're saying, like it's not going to kill you or anything to get on a podcast, or, I mean, just tweet something. I mean, if you have some of these little initials next to your name and people trust you and trust your opinions, you're someone who has published all of these things, like a tweet can help save a life. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's crazy, but some people just don't think about that because maybe they're just like, yeah, I just want this money. I'm trying to get these yachts. Which I guess I don't blame that. I want a yacht too.
I think that's especially important too, because like I joined TikTok because I hate myself, and
I know. I followed you today. I'm on there. I hate myself. It's the worst. It's funny to look at, but I hate doing it.
I know. And especially after watching The Social Dilemma, and I'm like, Mckenna, stop. But I think it brings it back to your point. Like, it's actually, I think, more important than ever that people in my field go on social media and are active, because there is so much, like, I'm just like scrolling through TikTok, right? And there's so much misinformation, or it's like very philosophical or conceptual, and they don't really know what they're talking about. So they're saying something general enough to get people's attention. It's just gross. Like, there are a lot of people that are kind of faking like they're expert, either
That's
intentionally to
very
get like
true.
the views, or they really believe in their bullshit,
Yeah.
which I'm not really sure which one's scarier to me. Um,
God,
but
yeah, that's
yeah,
true. Both of them are scary because if there's someone who
yeah,
has the ability to actually captivate an audience, that means there's going to be 25 million people thinking, yeah, if you put green beans in your ears before you go to sleep, it'll get all the earwax out. That's not a thing. But somebody has the ability to make that a thing. That's scary. There were 70 million plus people that thought Buddy should have had another shot at this. That's crazy. And that's also the good thing about social media. You can probably get 70 million people to believe in something. So they should start to believe in the services that will help impact their mental health for the better. We got to get to that point. So yeah, we need more doctors and people like that on social media posts and stuff. Has to happen.
yeah. I joined a podcast group on Facebook, and
Oh, Facebook.
there's so many coaches, so wellness coaches, empowerment coaches, like
Are those real
health
jobs?
coaches.
How do you get a job like that? Like I see people that have that title. I'm like, how do you just get that? Like you're a coach and you get paid for that. How do you do that?
So, admittedly, some people that are therapists will become coaches. And that makes sense to me because there's a slight difference. Um, and you can still use the same techniques that you've been like formally trained on.
Yeah.
And you can help people that don't necessarily have anything wrong yet. Like you could just be trying to help someone who's, I don't know, dealing with like just minor issues or whatever.
Yeah.
However, it's not a regulated field. Like there's no and granted, like I'm sitting here kind of talking shit about formal education to some extent, right? And a lot
No,
of
we're just
what
keeping it real.
a lot of like what we learn is actually in the field, right? Like we learn a lot of theory and stuff like that in school, what we learn in the field. So application is important, but what I've noticed is there's a lot of, again, it's unregulated, so you don't know like what training or if there's even a certification that this person has.
Oh yeah.
And so then what happens is like it seems like a lot of motivational speaking, and they're framing it in a different way, because if it was all the same thing, like why are there all these different names for the same type of coach? Like
Yeah.
what the hell is an empowerment coach? Like I don't know what that means. And health coaches are like, you can get certifications for that. The VA actually does that too. And
Yeah.
like there's some standardization there. So like there's some uniformity, and so that makes sense to me. But a lot of people, and I've seen it on TikTok too, I think that they've been through their own struggles like everyone else.
Yeah.
And then they really try to just motivate people, and we're going to be really bubbly, and we're going to just be really happy. And all I see are like these very kind of generalized statements. I haven't seen anyone
Yeah.
give like
No real
concrete
advice.
steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, like some concrete suggestions. Sitting with that person, it's like, hey, I went through this thing. I love hearing myself talk, and so I want to try to help people. Like,
Yeah. That's
that's what
how
I've
I
seen.
view it. I feel like it's exactly that because you see these people who like, and I even laugh sometimes because I'm like, I try not to give people advice because I don't want them to think that about me. Because like my major in college was psychology, didn't finish it, but took a couple of classes, and then I've experienced so much, and now you get to the 30s, you're like, oh, I'm a little bit wise, but you don't want to be that person that's like, yes, young Padawan, you should just do all this because here's what I did. I always have to like preface things, be like, look now, I done been through it, but this may not work out for you, and even the advice I might give you might be faulty. Seek another opinion. Like you gotta put
Mm-hmm.
people on to real stuff, but some of these people are they're so wrapped up in trying to go viral that they're just repeating things that they've read in a magazine article or glanced at a book or heard in passing, not really sure what it means. And then there are people who are like, oh my God, your shoes are great. I love your dog. So of course this is true. And I'm going to repost this and send it to 10,000 of my friends. And I'm sure we all post things that come from people that are like that. But it's crazy that there are so many people who then once they get famous and then once we start to poke holes in a lot of their theories and their stories, then people are they're so wrapped up in it. They're like, no, that can't be true. How dare you disrespect them? Like, we're just telling you that they're not like they're not telling you the right thing. We're telling you the right thing. Why are you not understanding it? They don't get it. But that's why I feel like the internet is dangerous, because now we have these platforms where people are allowed to just be pretend. Now there's 10 million Dr. Phil's. Dr. Phil's not even a real doctor. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think I saw a video on TikTok. I want to say it had it was high up there, like either hundreds of thousands of views or 1 million views. And the guy
Crazy.
talked about signs of being a visual learner. And most people think about that, right? Like a lot of us took a test when we were kids. So actually research has shown that that's not a thing. Like the auditory learning, all that stuff, like that's not a thing. Like we use all of them.
Yeah.
And so he's posting this, and thankfully enough people commented, especially like teachers, and they commented on it and were like, this isn't accurate, like this isn't a thing. And I don't think a lot of people are being malicious. Like I don't think he was intentionally trying to misinform people.
Yeah.
And that one is so commonly believed because it was believed for so long. He probably could have just Googled something and found it.
Yeah.
But that's the thing is, again, like he's not in the field. Like he's not an expert. He's not an expert in education or anything like that, or memory. And he posts like random stuff. I also see like one big warning sign is if you see anything that says psychological fact. That is a big pet peeve of mine. And that's because we can't say that anything in the field really, actually even in medicine technically, there's a margin of error in the research.
Yeah.
It's a small margin of error, but it's still an error.
Yeah,
and so
sure.
I hesitate to call it a fact because people are complicated, right? So there's so many different variables that are contributing to what you're studying, and there may be some variables that you haven't thought of and you don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
And yeah, so like if you see psychological fact or whatever, like I would challenge that a little bit. Yeah, like petty goat meme, like I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's like I said, it's crazy because you don't know what's real and what's not. So I always, empower people just to go read and do your own research, speak with people who you trust, who have knowledge. I don't think credentials necessarily have to be everything, because you can always learn something from everybody, no matter what level they are at in life. But I think when you start to talk about medicine and all of these things that we really do place high value in, you probably shouldn't be talking to Ben on TikTok about that shit. That would just be my advice. Like, don't talk to me about it. I'm just a person with some shows, makes funny jokes, does music. Like most of the people I follow, like these aren't people that you want to have these detailed conversations with or take your medicine advice from. A real doctor, that's different. But not people on TikTok. Yeah. It's crazy, man. And Facebook, man. They kicked me out of there. Like Facebook just went in and just deleted my shit. So I haven't been on Facebook since like March, since like quarantine started. I don't even know what life is like on there anymore. I'm sad. It's crazy.
You're not missing much because the best part was the memes, and you're probably getting the memes elsewhere. So.
Yeah, I have so many stored on my phone. Losing Facebook wasn't that tough. It did kind of hurt my shows a little bit. But the memes will always be there. Like my phone is full, 30,000+ of them. I barely have pictures of my own self. I have hella memes. Like I have the greatest scrapbook on the internet. Hardly any actual humans in it, unless they're on memes.
There you go.
Now you have a podcast and you've done some shows. How are you feeling about that? And do you like the direction it's heading?
Wow, that is so timely that you asked that, because yesterday I had a realization that no, it's actually, I'm not happy where it's going.
Really? Why is that?
And I think it's self-inflicted. So I think part of it is there are quite a few people in the field that I got sucked into the viewership is what happened. And so I'm new to doing podcasts, right? And so I'm seeing what other people are doing in the field because that's closest to like my podcast, right?
Yeah.
And they're just not like me in general, right? And so what I was doing is, so one of my episodes I sat down with 2 sex therapists, right?
Oh yeah, the two Tories.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that episode got way more downloads than the rest of my episodes. Now, surely a good chunk of that is like the content, right? Who doesn't want to talk about controversial topics? Who doesn't like talking about sex in the US, right?
For sure.
But I think the other part of it is I was a lot, and you can hear it, like I was a lot more chill in that episode. I was a lot more lighthearted. I cursed more. Like I was just a lot more myself.
Yeah.
And so I think I've gotten caught up in, you know, making like trying to be so formal, and that just like that's not me. Clearly by my hair, and I have like a ton of tattoos, like I curse a lot. And so I use Canva, like that app, to like, you know, post templates, right? To like give information about mental health stuff. And I noticed when I'm on there, I'm like, wow, so many of these are pink. And like a lot of the fonts are like super feminine. And I'm like, this is really interesting to me because marketing research would have told them to use this. And so I'm like, okay, are there more women that are using these in their businesses and on their pages? Why is that? Set that aside though. And I hate pink. Like, I hate pink. I'm not like, I don't have girly handwriting. Like I'm not a super feminine person. And so I'm kind of I was essentially trying to be sort of something that I'm not. I still like presented accurate information. I still try to present like a really balanced view in my episodes. And sometimes the episodes are heavy. Like I have an episode on grief coming up. I do have a dark sense of humor, but like probably not going to show that as much on the podcast.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think I got sucked into that a little bit, like leaning too much on what other people are doing when the whole purpose of starting a podcast is you want to do something different, right? Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm not gonna lie, I was expecting this shit is great, I'm killing it, I'm killing, like I'm kind of shocked, but at the same time, like I kind of feel that I know like this is my shit's still moving slow. Every day is kind of like do I want to keep doing this? Like I think when I was doing like the radio stuff, it was, you know, it was cool because you could get on there, you could talk, and then there was like the music stuff was a part of it, and it was like, oh, you're doing a radio show, and then you have like another podcast. And then I feel like when I quit radio and then my Facebook got deleted, then I started to be like, oh, I was doing this and like it was cool, but like now, like what is the point? And like I also like want to do other things in life. I'm like, do I really want to like have these shows on here while I'm also trying to like, because I want to get into some real estate stuff. I'm like, I don't know, do I want to do all this? But my goal was to do radio and do shows, and I'm like, I gotta stick with it, man. Like, and it's like the tough part. It's like you jump in quick and you're like, oh, this is great, and then you're kind of like in it, and then you're like looking around, you're like, fuck, do I like it here? Like, do I? Like, you're literally looking around, and it's like, maybe I do, maybe I don't. Let's just keep walking and see how it goes. So, yeah, no, yeah. I totally get it, man. You go through those feelings, but I think your show is great. I loved listening to you and the two Tories. Like, that was just so funny, but I'm sure you get that all the time. I need to listen to your other ones. Like, do you plan on having more shows like the ones you had with the two Tories, or more kind of the other direction? So it kind of just, well, I guess not, because you're not really, like you said, you're the opposite of just being overly formal and all that.
Yeah. I'm definitely getting them to come back because actually people either messaged me or like I asked the question on Instagram, like what other topics would you want to hear? And there were some sex related topics. I was like, all right, we'll bring you back. And I know both of them. Like every guest that I've had, I know them personally.
Yeah.
I think it's important for me to vet whoever I'm going to have on there, or otherwise if they say, like, I'm gonna have to challenge them, because to me, you know, like, we have an ethical code, and that doesn't stop, you know, once we clock out. And so it's important for me to have the accurate information. And so I like doing the podcast a lot. I think it's more, you know, I got really sucked into, okay, like, presenting the data in a way that, like, people can understand, and kind of losing a little bit of, like, the lightheartedness, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's, like, an easier fix, I think. So they're for sure coming back. I have a lot of guests coming. So there's a lot of research actually on gut health.
You said gut health, like your stomach?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
I definitely need to tune into that.
yeah. Actually, it shocked a lot of us. Probably not in some fields. Like, I'm sure dietitians have been saying this forever, but that's actually, they're calling it like your second immune system. The happy hormones like serotonin that you're taught you make in your brain, you actually make most of it in your stomach. So
I
they're,
didn't know that.
yeah. So they're doing research now, and like, okay, so then does diet directly affect mental health? And so I'm going to have...
That's just a crazy thought, because I know I was literally telling my friend Erica last night that she was saying, oh, I started the Whole30 diet. And I was like, oh, yeah, I've done that before. And I was like, it really went well. And it's, for me, I deem it as like the greatest accomplishment of my life, because I'm somebody who struggles with food. And so, and especially when I'm like in a bad space or I'm stressed, and like I have moments where I do good. Like, I'm in one of those right now where, like, even in a bad week, like, I still went 7 days a week doing workouts. Like, you know, I didn't destroy myself by eating horribly. And so it kept me to where, like, I didn't completely, like, drown in my sorrow like I normally do when I'm having a stressful week. But, like, I think, like, if I would have, it was hard. It's hard to turn down pizza and things, and like, you know, you because then you, when you're in a bad mood, you're like, I need the cake, I need all this, I need all these drinks, and da 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 da, and then the next day you're like feeling it, and then you hate yourself more. And I'm like, I'm so glad that, like, I didn't do that. But it's interesting to think, like, God, like, when I'm at my worst, the thing that I do is I just eat. And I like active things, so I can still get out, ride my bike, go play basketball, do all that. But like, I always end up beating myself up, being like, you didn't have to do that. You could have eaten less. Like, you didn't have to eat a whole pizza by yourself just because you were like in a stressed out mood. Like, that's not a snack. A whole large pizza is not a snack. One slice of pizza is a snack.
I can identify with that.
That's interesting.
A similar concept is like diet culture. And so I have a few guests lined up for that. And so I guess what I've done is like really amped up the guests, because the topics that I'm going to be talking about coming up are really important, and some of them are controversial. So I'm going to be also interviewing someone who's done some forensic psychology, which basically means they've like worked with law enforcement or they've worked with corrections. And so she's worked with law enforcement, and also has worked with human trafficking survivors, because I just needed to go out there. Yeah, I needed to go out there. That, like, unfortunately, if you have a kid, it's much more likely to be one of your families betray you that traffic your kid than it is some random person at Wayfair who snatched, or like Walmart who's going to snatch up your kid. And I think people need to hear that.
That is intense. They don't think about that type of stuff.
Right. Like, you see the hashtag, which I get it. Like, I saw the hashtag Save Our Children, right? So that was like trending for a while. Especially on Facebook. So I guess you did miss this a little bit. I'm sure it was on Instagram too, but like, there was a lot of like, Save Our Children, blah, 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 because there was all that stuff that happened with Wayfair.
Yeah.
Whether or not the Wayfair thing happened, which probably didn't, what happened was people clogged up the actual hotlines for human trafficking. And so it was more difficult for them to get to kids that were actually being trafficked. And on top of that, I mean, unfortunately, it's much more likely to be a parent, a neighbor, like an uncle or grandfather, much more likely to be that person than it is
that's true.
Some random snatching at Walmart. But like, that's harder to face.
Yeah,
Yes,
you
right.
can plan that type of stuff a little bit better. It's like the same thing, like, as someone who works in education, when we go through all the trainings and signs and things to watch out for when people are grooming children. Like, I can
Yep,
spot that and identify that in a second, just because of
yep.
years and years of training, because it's my field. Like, safety is like a big concern, but it is always interesting when you take it to the next level, because we don't ever think like, oh, our kids are going to get trafficked. We're just like, make sure that the staff and the other kids aren't being weirdos. But when you think of that next step and you're like, God, could you imagine someone's family member like setting them up, and it's like their niece or something, and then you're like, oh yeah,
Yep.
I was watching them at the park and they ran away. Like, no, you put them in a van to go to Mexico.
Yep.
Like, that's crazy.
Or your dad like pimped you out for money or whatever.
Yeah,
And
that's
but that's
insane.
exactly, like, the point that
Oh,
you're making
made me
is
cringe.
exactly why people ran with the hashtag, because it's a lot harder truth to accept
Yeah.
that it's like one of your own people, like your brother or your sister doing this to your kid, or your parent doing this to your kid, or a neighbor doing this to your kid. Like, that's a lot harder to accept,
Yeah.
right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on like the random stranger creepers that are hanging out in Walmart, because that's a lot easier for me to accept. It's still scary, but I
Yeah.
would much rather think that it's some random stranger
Yeah, than
than me
someone you
being
actually
betrayed by
know.
my own family. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't believe it until it's real. I'm like, yo, you gotta be cautious of everybody, cause you just don't know. And like, what I tell people is, even if y'all share the same blood, you do not share their brain functions, and you don't know what they're thinking. Like, some of these people are just on some weirdo stuff, and they just are good actors. They've led you to believe that they're not, and then they do it, and then bam, your whole world is crushed. And it's the person you would have least suspected, or it's usually the person you medium suspect, according to Dwight Schrute. That's why I always go with the person you
Yep.
medium suspect. That's usually who
Yes.
it is, and that has been proven to be 100% accurate of a technique. So yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I look forward to hearing more from these specific episodes that you have. You think of like the forensic stuff, and just all, like, especially the human trafficking. Well, I'm looking forward to that, because I want to, this is information I like to come onto my show and talk about to people. Like, on the Memechel Jackson show, throughout the last like year or so that I've been doing it, I always like talk about some of these crazy ass stories, and then we try to like, try to go into like, what is the person thinking? Because that's the interesting part. I always want to know what is a person thinking. Like, even if it's like your brother like takes your own daughter or your son, like, I would be like, what were you thinking? Why is your brain functioning like this? You thought it was acceptable to like deprive me of my own child and toss them into a truck and allow someone to take them? Why would you even think to do that? That's someone you're related to. Like, it's the thought process is what interests me about people. Because what the fuck are they thinking? Like, when someone's driving
Yeah.
30 when it's the speed limit's 60, what are you thinking right now? Why is your brain misfiring and malfunctioning?
Yeah, I mean, it's and I have worked with people that have committed sexual offenses. I'm certainly not an
Really, that's
expert.
interesting.
Like, I don't have the formal training, but
Yeah,
I have. It's important to note that the ones that I worked with wanted help, and it's not
yeah,
the group that just doesn't think they have a problem. There's a lot that we still don't know. But one thing seems, I mean, there's a lot of difference, right? Like, it could be opportunistic. Like, I think there's this view that if you're, sexually assaulting kids, that you're doing that all the time. Like, you have this impulse to do it with everyone, but sometimes it's actually like a crime of opportunity, which is
yeah,
hard to like, that's hard to kind of think about, versus like a robbery, right? Or something like
yeah,
that. But sometimes it is a crime of opportunity. And like you mentioned, like, if it's a family member, the opportunity is there.
yeah,
And there are certainly people that, there's certainly people that, are like serial predators or whatever.
yeah,
And
for
so they go
sure.
after like multiple kids. They're more, strangers and stuff like that. But yeah, like, working at the Pensacola jail was super eye-opening for me. That was like my first because it was in my master's program, that was my first introduction to the field. And so we had to do like 1,000 hours in a year while we're still going to school.
Damn.
And it's unpaid. So like it was a rough year.
How many
But
times a week were you going to the jail back then?
oh, it was every day, all day,
Oh,
every day. It was like a
shit.
full-time job. Yeah. Most master's programs don't require that, but I'm really glad that mine did. The rose-colored glasses were removed pretty quickly. I found out that I was a really good fit for corrections. It worked super well for me. But yeah, there were definitely people there who had committed some, or were accused, because it's jail, so you haven't necessarily been sentenced yet, were accused of like committing some pretty heinous crimes. And so one of my first clients ever, actually, like at that jail, he had molested his daughter, I think once or twice or something like that.
Damn, buddy's wildin'.
He had like a lot of shame. So not that that's okay to do, but I think it's important to know that like if we just simplify like what this person looks like or acts like, then we may be missing some signs, right?
Yeah.
So he felt a ton of shame about it. So he was not like that person that's like, I'm not doing anything wrong, or like, she's in love with me, like we're in love with each other. Like, no, he knew he fucked up. And he ended up getting 25 years. So we really worked through some things. And so, yeah, I think it just goes to show you, again, like, we want to try to predict the behavior, right? Like, that's our goal. We want to keep the kids safe. But even people in my field, we can't predict behavior super well. Like, statistically, we're not that accurate.
You never know what someone's motivation is either.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, if you watch the documentary Abducted in Plain Sight, a lot of people watch that on Netflix.
The one where when the dad gave Buddy a hand ski in the car?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. And the mom, oh my God.
So
I forgot about that.
So a lot of people, I mean, it's been a long year in 2020. Like, that was not crazy compared to what happened this year.
That was crazy thing to hear about. Watching that, I was like, how? Why? I just kept saying that the whole time.
Exactly. Like, people are watching and they're like, well, how? I don't understand. Like, I can't understand how this happens. And it's like, okay, well, so from your trainings in grooming, like it's subtle and it happens over time. And they did a good job of showing that in the documentary. The other piece that's missing is that this happened several decades ago. And so our cautiousness now with kids
it's way different.
is because of stuff like that happened like in the 70s, 60s, 80s. Yeah. But that just goes to show you, like, again, the grooming can be like so effective. It can happen to adults too, like in various jobs or whatever. But talking about kids, I mean, when you watch that documentary, like I was watching and I'm like,
oh my God, I couldn't believe it. I remember the one part that had me tripped out was when the dude called the wife and was like, hey, I have this situation and they tell me the only way that I can move past it is if I come over tonight and sleep in the bed with your daughter. And she was just like, oh, well, yeah, of course. And my mind was blown because I was just like, there's no diagnosis on earth that ends with a doctor being like, and you know what I need you to do? I need you to go sleep in a bed with someone else's teenage daughter, even though you're a grown man. That no one is prescribed that ever. And the wife just was like, yeah, because I'm brainwashed and I love you. And you say that you love me, so why can't you sleep in the bed with my dog? That's your daughter, bro. What? That shit was so crazy to me. I still cannot eat that. That's something that will never leave my brain. So as soon as you said that, I was just like, oh, that's that one. Because I still cannot believe that. And I'm like, there's no fucking way. But it is, like you said, like from the 70s, it's way different. Even like the YMCA's out here, like we have some off-site YMCA's, like they're like camps and stuff. And before I had left, I was told that there was an ongoing lawsuit that people have filed from being molested and abused by staff back at those camps, like in the 70s. Like there were people who were still like trying to fight that, and in like a lot of like what you kind of you said, a lot of our process and techniques now, they hinge off the backs of those situations
Which
because
is terrible.
yeah,
Yeah.
because back then people just didn't give a shit. You sent your kid to the camp all day. You didn't care who they were hanging out with. It was the horny ass teenagers, and they're, imposing their will on smaller children and blah blah blah. And then people start to realize, oh, all of this is wrong, and people actually want to do things about it. Like, it's like you hate it for these people who've had to live with that trauma for all of these years. It's like, how? And even that
I
girl in that
think,
documentary, how? How do you
yeah,
even live with that?
I think there was a lot more trust. And I also think it wasn't something that was talked about. Like it stayed in the
Yeah,
family,
for
right?
sure.
So, one thing that a lot of people don't know, actually, a lot of people even in my own field. So, Freud is like considered the father of psychology, right? So he's like the person that started talk therapy. Basically, he was a psychiatrist. Um, so when people use the word hysterical, there's some historical connotations to that, and it comes from him. So he came up with this diagnosis of hysteria, and then that's where like everything comes in about like penis envy, and it's really outdated. But um, the hysteria diagnosis was like a lot of kind of rapidly changing emotions, difficulty trusting others. And so when he looked more into it, he found out that because there were so many women that had this diagnosis or like the symptoms. And so he wanted to check it out. And he had just arrived to the United States. He was trying to run from Germany during like the Nazi era.
Yeah.
So I think it was the Nazi era. Anyway, so he moved to the United States, was trying to check this out, right? And he found that it was because they had been sexually abused as kids, and the numbers were just like astronomically high. But he was afraid of the political backlash, and so what he did was essentially blame them and said it's because you essentially want to sleep with your dad and you can't, and you wish you were a man, and that's what the issue is. And so that's where this started from. And so when people say like, oh, this person was hysterical, like that's actually where that came from historically. But what
Oh.
people don't know is, oh, actually, there was a legit reason for why people were experiencing that. And that's also when they use like vibrators to treat them. And it was a whole mess. My
This is
field has like,
insane.
yeah.
I've never even heard some of this stuff. This is crazy. The things that
Yeah.
people do.
Yeah.
Man.
We've had some pretty nasty experiments, but yeah, so when people like back then, the numbers of child abuse, especially childhood sex, they were so high, but
Yeah.
like it wasn't. He was afraid of the political backlash, right? It wasn't talked about like at all, at
Yeah,
all.
that's
And so he
crazy.
covered it up and buried it. That's what happened.
It's interesting because, like, the cycle is always there where, obviously stuff happens to you as a kid. Something during that time happens to where you think these things or this behavior is acceptable, and as you grow into an adult, you start to do those things to other kids or to your own kid. And then there are some kids that this happens to where, obviously they become like shells of themselves because they've been traumatized, but then they're also being blamed for these things happening to them by other adults. People who we hope are in a space where they can like help a young child or a small person not have to carry that for the rest of their lives. It's weird that adults will cover these types of things up, even with the understanding of how horrible this type of stuff is. Like, to know that a child could get abused and like you as an adult would be like, well, we just can't say anything. I'm somebody who's like, what the fuck you mean? We're gonna say whatever the fuck we want to say. Like, and we're gonna make
Yeah.
it known, and we're gonna make sure that these people understand that they're not gonna skate by on this type of shit. Like, we're not gonna do that. Like, we're not just gonna forget that so and so is an abuser. We're not gonna just forget, like, not acknowledge the the trauma that you caused people within your own household, that shit ain't gonna ever be forgotten. You have to acknowledge that. It's weird that people sweep that under the rug. It's embarrassing too.
I can't tell you how many clients I've had that were like sexually abused as kids, especially if they're girls. Like if it's boys, it's a lot of like, oh, that didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
If it's girls, sometimes there's that, but I legit have had clients, like so many whose moms told them, like maybe it was a stepdad or something, and the moms told them, well, you seduced him, like you were wearing short shorts around the house, like why were you doing that, like 11 or 12, because
that's crazy. That shit happened to my mom growing up. She told me that her parents used to blame her for the fact that some of their friends had sexually assaulted my mom when she was young. And then when she confronted her parents about it, and even her brother, the entire family completely blamed her for it, saying little shit like that. That's crazy. Why are you not blaming the adult? Because the adult is hopefully in a space where they can be like, no, this is a bad decision. Why would I ever do this? If you're an adult man, even adult female, you have access to other adults. You don't need to have access to a child. So in that situation, you are the person who needs to make the responsible choice. If you don't, it is your fault and your fault alone. It is not the child. Even if the child's like, hey, I want to do all these things to you, you could be like, no, you don't, because you don't even know what that means, nor do you have the experience. We need to have a talk with your parents. You don't go, oh, yeah, sure. You're not R. Kelly. It's disgusting.
Yeah. I think it's going back to what we said earlier, that's too hard to accept, because then that would mean there's a ton of guilt associated with like, I should have seen this coming. If it's like someone snatching your kid up at Walmart, I mean, yeah, there's still guilt there, right?
Yeah.
But if it's your own family, there's like the betrayal piece, like that shatters your reality as a parent. And not defending them, but basically explaining probably where that's coming from is like, that would shatter your reality to know that, like, that would just be, denial's easier. Like it's safer for you than to accept that, holy shit, like this person that I married did this to my kid, or like my brother or whatever. And so I can't accept that, because then that means I am somehow also responsible for that.
Remember on the documentary, Buddy was able to do this multiple times to that girl and that family, all because they just refused to believe it. I'm like, and didn't he get caught once? And then like came back and was like still doing it, and they were just like, yeah, we welcomed you with open arms, even though you're a convicted felon or something, for the thing that we accused you of. Welcome home. That shit is weird. But it's like you said, like it's easier just to be like, no, there's no way. There's no way. But there is, because people are people. You have to believe that anything can happen. And a part of that is just because of the fact that a lot of people, even older adults, they're curious. People are curious and they're fucking weird. We're all weird. I realized last night that I'm super fucking weird. Then I realized with what it is, I like to name things. And I realized this last night. I like to name things. And I think it's because growing up, I did not have a lot of friends as a kid. So you give everything a name, and it's like you have your own set of friends, and it keeps me comfortable in my spaces, and I don't feel like I'm by myself. That's fucking weird. So it should not be over the heads of people to think that other people can do weirder things. And some of those things involve violating people well beyond where they should ever be violated, which is zero. No one should ever be violated, their personal space or anything. But some of these people are so weird that they'll go to the furthest of extents to see how far they can push boundaries. No one should ever just pretend like no one's, oh, that person would never do that. Yeah, the fuck they would. If they want to do it, they will. That's how this shit works.
I think there's this, which I don't think, movies and shows have really helped at all, but
yeah, for sure.
I think there's still this image of like, you can easily identify who a predator is. It's like this super creepy looking dude. He's going to give you all the warning signs in the world up front, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you brought up R. Kelly earlier, right? Like that's someone who like people loved him.
Yeah.
And so like, I think people, again, like they're looking for these really easy, simplified categories of who people are, and that's not the case. And research wise, we don't necessarily have accurate numbers of like how often this happens. I mean, we can ask kids, right? Like we can ask the people that experienced it,
Yeah.
but then we don't know, were they the only kid? Like we just don't know, because ethically, like we can't do some of these experiments.
Yeah.
But then also, like, even if we give like a random survey to people, they're not going to answer honestly, right?
Yeah.
Because that makes them look like a bad person, right? So then I'm more likely to lie, even if it's an anonymous survey.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to get accurate numbers about. I realize we've been talking about this for a while. I don't know if this is where you envision this episode going,
No,
but
this is dope. It's better than expected.
But yeah, we don't have good numbers
Yeah.
because of that, like, social desirability piece of like, I'm gonna look bad if I acknowledge this or admit this, and so I'm not gonna do it. It's like me trying to study therapists on being racist, right? If I clue them in at all what I'm looking for, they're gonna deny it or give me the answer what they think I want to hear, right?
Yep.
Because they don't want to look like a bad person.
Yeah.
So the same thing applies in this case too, and so it's just hard to get accurate numbers.
Yeah, that's a great point. Man, it's always just so fascinating. Because some of this stuff is like, we want to put a stop to abuse of all kinds. But yet, like, we also will shame the fuck out of somebody even if they admit that they have these urges. You could have never done it. We could have like been filming you for your entire life and never seen you even commit the act. The second you say you have an urge, like, oh shit, you're a predator, or you're an abuser, or you're gonna become one. And then then you got to go to Alcatraz or some far off wasteland or something. We can't have you over here because you're dangerous. It's like just the urge. So then like people are way less likely to face some of the issues or concerns or thoughts that they have because they are worried about being shamed. Like, so we're in a space where like America or Earth is always going to be rocking a hard place because we always want to do the right thing, but like we don't ever want to like do the right things to get to the right thing.
Yeah.
Because you can't shame somebody but then be like, but we're here to help you. That doesn't make any sense.
And it makes it more complicated too because my field doesn't have super effective treatment for it either. So that's also a tough piece, is we haven't found I mean, it's effective some of the time, but we haven't found treatment that's like as effective for depression or different anxiety disorders or something like that. And so that adds another piece of, okay, so even if the shame was eliminated, right, and like we had people come forward, whether it's just urges, which there's some reason to believe that there's some people that have urges that never act on it.
Yeah.
But then on my field's end, we don't have the best and most effective treatment for that. It's not the most successful. And so that's the other piece that's really tricky, is like we're struggling to find it. And again, part of it is the research limitations, people not wanting to come forward. And so some of that certainly is the case. But we also don't have the most effective treatment for it.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, you always have to, I always try to say glass half full rather than half empty. Hopefully you guys are just on the way to, getting some of this stuff figured out and, again, help push people to a better tomorrow. I mean, I feel like that has to always just be the ultimate goal. Like, you just want to get people to be as comfortably as possible. We should be telling people that every day rather than just the last few days that they're going to breathe. Like when you got like that's such a weird thing to me, because life every day is extremely uncomfortable depending on who you are, the things you go through, what you have gone through, and how it impacts your day-to-day life. I mean, there's some people who can go through the most severe of trauma and just be like, fuck it, and it's just repressed all the way to the back in a filing cabinet that's underneath 10,000 blankets or something. They're never even gonna worry about it again. But then there are other people, it's like, fuck, man, like I got a paper cut and now I'm like thinking of every single reason that this is gonna make my day bad, and then that caused me anxiety, and now I had to call into work, and now like I'm underneath the bed. Like, it's crazy because like some of this stuff like almost sounds like, you think of that scenario like, what a joke, right? I'm like, no, it's not, because people actually go through that. Like, I legitimately know people, and I feel bad because I recognize as I got older that, like, in some way I didn't offer my support support to them. I almost kind of shamed them a little bit. But I personally know people who have had days like that where they've woken up, something has happened, it crippled their entire day, and they couldn't function. And I've been like, why didn't you just do this? And that is such a shitty thing to say to somebody who is really struggling mentally, especially if in those moments you don't understand. But then I'm looking at myself being like, why don't you just do this like on my hardest days? And I'm like, because it's not that simple. Sometimes something just happens up here and it puts you on the bench and the other players go in and take over and you're just watching the fucking game. And there's nothing you can do. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. And so for the people who are like really going through it, like I think, we got to get to that place where we can figure some of these things out for people, because people need our help. I mean, obviously we can't, like, it's all temporary, like I said, but if maybe we lose 100 people today, we need to be doing everything we can to make sure that it's 99 or less tomorrow.
Yeah, especially this year. I mean, the initial research, and obviously people you just talked to, right, has shown that, people have been much more depressed this year.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously because of COVID, but then, quarantine, the anxiety around that. What was interesting is one study, the researchers found that even though people were depressed, they did not feel lonely. And so that was something they hadn't expected. But what happened is people like found other ways to connect with people, right? Like that's the great thing about technology right now. So like we can use Discord, or like we can FaceTime, or like we can, have Zoom meetings, or like whatever the case is. And so that was a really interesting find that they weren't expecting, is that, okay, so maybe depression, like mental illness things are not necessarily as related to feeling like lonely. And that can also be used as a buffer. Yeah, so that was super interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's weird. I feel like when there's an abundance of people who are engaging with me, I feel like that's when I sometimes feel like the most lonely. But I feel like in the beginning of quarantine, when I was like just by my fucking self all the time, this shit is great. I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I did not feel lonely at all. It wasn't really until, I don't know, the last, couple months, I feel like there have been some times where I've just been like going through some things, but then like I feel like some of the people that I lean on, they are also going through their respective situations, and so it's just been tough to find comfort and shoulders to lean on, because everybody's feeling bogged down. So like I have to always remind myself of that, like although you may feel lonely, you are not lonely. It's just tough right now because you're going through a trauma, and then you're asking someone who's also going through a trauma to help support you in a moment. Like it's just tough. But
it is, yeah. The community support, I think, is really important, especially right now. And I think that helps too, because like if you have one person that's going through it that week and you're not, like maybe you can be supportive for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Then maybe you have another friend who is, like if you just spread it out more, you're more likely to find people, that you can like depend on. And like we, my program like to call it group struggle. Like we're all just like miserable together and trying to find, something that we can do. And so even if we're not, like, if we don't have the energy to listen to each other, really process whatever we're going through, we can like find something else to do, right? Like we can find an activity, or we can just sit there, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's good.
So yeah, I think the big thing is people have to cut themselves some slack this year. I mean, it's not normal to have a pandemic, and one that's lasted this long. And of course, the numbers are rising again. And so I think people are still expecting the same level of productivity at work, the same level of functioning at home with friends, with family, whatever the case is.
Yeah,
and you tough. Like you can't expect that. Yeah. Like you can't. I mean, that's not realistic.
Yeah,
and
not.
Workplaces need to consider that too, for sure, because like that's not realistic or helpful, right?
Yeah, for sure.
We're already feeling depressed. more exhausted, so probably more likely to burn out. And
Yeah.
so you have to like be more flexible and creative in how, you treat your employees.
Yeah, actually, I feel like that's important. I feel fortunate that my employer actually, like on my weekly meeting the other day, they were like, before we like get into the Christmas stuff, we want to just check on people and, again, and make sure everybody's doing all right. Ask if there's anything that anyone needs as we get to the end of the year. And I was like, you know what?
That's
I
cool.
actually appreciated that because I know not a lot of people are getting that because there are a lot of these businesses that, again, money sometimes for some strange reason people care about paper and pieces of coins. That's more important than the feelings of human beings. That will forever be weirdo shit to me, that we care more about money than the well-being of the people that we have to be surrounded by every day. But then people will try to be like, well, we got to get the homeless people off the street. I'm like, yeah, but you care too much about the money you put them on the street, or you helped cause that. And they had there's these mental aspects, and there's all these things like you want to, again, like we were talking about, how we want to do the right thing, but we're not willing to do all the necessary steps to get to the right thing. Like, I don't know, we just are in. This is just a crappy place. So it's nice when you see,
Yeah.
like, I'm fortunate that my employer actually checked on me, because I know people who are not in that same space. They're worried about losing their jobs. Their employer's not giving them information. Or you have some people who are like, I have friends who are being forced to work because, boss man has to keep this Benz car payment going, and so they need employees. But then it's like, what's your option? Like, you're in the 93 Civic, but like, you need this job. It's hard to get
Hmm.
another job during quarantine, so you have to go. Like, the
Yeah.
money, man, it's like the greed, and like, like I said, we went back to hoarding of resources, the money, the greed, all these things. But yet we are all, a lot of these services are intended, and these infrastructures were created to help support the people, but like, we're just not really supporting them, I guess. Not as well as we probably should be. Look at all the advancements that we have. Earlier this year in April, Jeff Bezos made $13 billion in a month. Like, we can get packages here in 2 days, and you can do all these things. You and I are communicating states away from each other via the internet, but like, we're hoarding mental health resources from people. Or like, during like the winter time, like, you ever see where like cops will go out and arrest people for giving out food to other people? Like, like, we allocate time and resources to stuff like that, but like, not to actually like save people, especially even from themselves. Because like I said, like, some of this stuff up here, it just does what it wants to do. And
Yeah.
even though you physically can control things, you don't always have control of this. And I think people sleep on that a lot, especially if they just feel like they're okay, or like, that's not happening to me, so it doesn't really matter, right? Or maybe it's like, oh, that can't be real. Like, why can it absolutely can be real.
Yeah. And I think one benefit this year, probably the only benefit, um, for my field now, there's a lot more virtual therapy,
Yes,
where
that's
there wasn't
awesome
before.
too.
The VA was ahead of that, and so they had already been doing some virtual therapy, but there was like a lot of hesitancy. I admit I was biased too. Like, I thought, well, there's just no way that it's as effective. But the research, even way before COVID hit, had said that it is just as effective. And then when COVID
Can I
hit,
ask you something real quick?
so
I don't mean to cut you
yeah,
off, but your initial thought on why you wouldn't think it would be effective, is that just because it just wasn't in person?
yeah. I mean, it was totally like a bias on my end that I just thought, okay, having someone in the room with me, like, I can, like, the body language piece,
Yeah.
like, for me, but there really isn't significantly a difference. And for COVID, they probably would have had better outcomes doing virtual care, especially during quarantine, because there isn't the anxiety of like going out in public and stuff like that. And then
Yeah.
also, like, you save your own resources because you're not driving to an appointment, like using gas.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
true.
because we're doing virtual care, like, some people have opened their own practices, like working out of their home, doing only virtual sessions. And so that would save the clients money because there isn't the overhead cost, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, BetterHelp, they were already doing virtual sessions. It's pretty cheap considering that it doesn't go through insurance, but of course, like, it is still, expensive for some people.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people to, if you find like a private practice, for example, meaning like they own their own business, ask them if they'd be willing to do like a sliding scale for you, if they'd be willing to do pro bono services, because technically, ethically, we're supposed to do some of that. We're supposed to, just like attorneys, like we're supposed to provide some, like we can't do all
Yeah,
necessarily,
for sure.
but we are supposed to do some of that. And so if people are struggling, I mean, I would say, reach out to a therapist, or, look at BetterHelp. Or again, like there are some places that are still doing all virtual care. And so therefore they could theoretically reduce their costs because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and for anyone watching this, I'll definitely add a slide that has some information and resources that you can, links and phone numbers. We'll make sure we put all that on there just to make sure we provide it to the people. That's super cool, and I was very glad when they went to the virtual stuff. And like I did ask you that question because I was wondering if it's the same thing as like the school stuff. Like we thought the same thing about the kids,
Yeah.
where you think, oh, if these kids, and some kids, it's a complete colossal failure because they thrive more in the environment when they're with people. We get that. That's
Yeah.
just natural. But there are some kids who were not thriving at school and now they do remote learning, and it's basically just like, here's your stuff, work at your pace within reason, and you're not feeling the pressure of people on top of you, and you're able to get more done. Like, some of my students, I've seen them take tremendous strides, almost to the point where, like, we have one kid at my school, we've been celebrating him because he went from being this very very immature, and like especially at his age, like, and obviously there are some variables at play, but like some of the stuff you're just like, come on, man. And then like we
Yeah.
switched on a remote learning, we worked with him over the summer, and like now he's like back at school, and like he's like the leader of all of our kids. His attitude, his demeanor is way different. He's very calm. He comes in, he talks to everybody, he asks everybody, how's your day going? He's like, it's complete difference. And some of that was just like, let him go home and work for a little bit. Like, we had no
Yep.
idea that that impact would be so great. So it is kind of cool to know that, like, with therapy services, that they have provided that. And I bet it is such a joy for people who do not want to leave the house, have to venture out into public. Because like I said, like when I went to that the first appointment when I went last year, I was shaking a little bit because I'm like,
Yeah.
fuck, like, do I even want to do this? I barely talk to the people that I'm close with. Talking to a stranger. But then I do this. I mean, you're not a stranger, obviously, but I'll get on here
Yeah.
and talk to strangers all day. I mean, look at me online, just talking to everybody. But it's also different because, like, it's not my name. It's like
Yeah.
they don't actually
True.
see me. It's like, it's not even my profile picture. I think it's a picture of Michael Jordan or something. Like, it's like, it's just so different. But then when you're face to face, and I'm like, oh, and the conversation is directly about my problems. So we're not just gonna talk about The Office or talk about Brooklyn Nine-Nine and what's funnier. That's what she said, or title your sex tape. I still don't know. But like, you're not going in there for that. It's 30
Yeah.
45 minutes of like, here are some of what I feel are my root issues. Like, what do I do? And it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get to talk about it now in your own home if you're doing it
Yeah.
virtually. Because, like you said, if it's the first time that you're going to an appointment, like that's really nerve wracking.
Nerve
And
wracking.
so, if you're able to do it in a place that you already feel comfortable, I mean, I say go for it. And the other
Absolutely.
piece, too, I don't know how we'd actually measure this. There is a way to measure it, but I suspect that the other reason why it works is that providers are also, like, I'm working from home. And so for the most part, and I'm also more comfortable at home. And so I'm not at work where I'm maybe more stressed out, or like I'm pressured to be like
Yeah.
super productive, or like just like the vibe maybe more stressful at work depending on where I'm working at. And so if I'm working and I'm not caught in like rush hour traffic because I'm working from home.
Yep.
And so if I'm feeling more relaxed, then my client is probably going to pick up on that, you
Yep.
know?
It provides you the ability to be more effective with the work and the service that you're going to provide. It's going to make the patient feel more comfortable, and they're actually going to believe, and they should, obviously, they're going to feel, along with believing, that the things that they're taking in during your sessions are actually going to help them. If your vibe is off because of all the variables that you listed, because you're just a normal adult human like everybody else, it's going to make it hard for that person to feel like they're gaining from it, especially if, like I said, the vibe is off. So I think it does benefit everybody. I don't know if I'd want to work from home forever, but I do feel like even my productivity is a little bit better, because if you're having a tough day,
Mhm.
like, I'd rather be at my house and doing my work than be at school, because then you feel like you have to be on for people. I don't do well with that, especially if I'm like in a shitty mood. So yeah, I'm sure there are 10 times the amount of benefits for a therapist. They feel like they can deliver more to their clients, being refreshed and not feeling that type of pressure. So that's dope for you for sure.
Yeah, I think hopefully that's a change that's going to stick, because I think that it is more welcoming for, I mean, some clients for sure, they're like, no, I don't want to do this over video. Like, I want to see you
Yeah.
in person. That's cool. But yeah, I mean, like you said, being really nervous starting therapy, I think this is a way to make it a lot less stressful.
Yeah.
Because therapy, it does get stressful at times. Like, you're working through whatever difficult shit that you need to work through. So we don't need to add the extra layer that's kind
Yeah,
of
for sure.
unnecessary at this point. And it took COVID to prove that we could still be, well, all fields, like not just mine, but like a lot of fields proved, oh, we're just as productive, and
Yeah.
actually maybe even more productive. We don't actually have to physically come into work
Yep.
to do our jobs. And
Absolutely.
so if there's one benefit of COVID, like if I have to think of one, like that's probably
Yeah.
the only one I can think of. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think, like, we all have to remember that we're all just people. So expecting certain people to be perfect in certain moments, like, you can't have that. So you have to look at some of
Yeah.
this stuff, and, like, when you think of productivity, if you're wanting to maximize it, like, the main thing is that the environment can't be filled with stress and tension. Like, and sometimes the places that have been created where work is housed have the most tension. If you're spending 8 hours at a place where, like, you don't like 5 out of the 7 people you work with, like, you're not probably going to do as great a job as you could if all of you were just online and you could just keep the camera on, like, a picture of you on vacation, and then your
Right.
your interaction with those 5 people are very limited. You don't feel any type of way because you're just over here in your own space. You guys still get your work done. Bam, business thrives. No big deal. But sometimes half the battle at work is just dealing with the people that you work with, because there's so many of us. We're all on top of each other. Everybody's different. No one likes that shit because everybody wants everyone to be just like them, which is not how it fucking works. And it causes unnecessary stress. And then there's a lot of us that really love all the people around us. And then there are people who don't like those people because, why are you so positive? I don't like you because you're so positive. So it's just so many things that, like, if we, I feel like getting to a point where if we did like a 2 days on, 3 days off type of work week, I think you'll see, like, what we're seeing now. People will still be equally, if not more, productive than they ever were. I feel like it works, and it's going to directly impact the success of everyone's mental health. You want people to be in good spaces, especially when it comes to time to make decisions. No one can really make well-informed decisions if they're, in crazy mode. And, it helps when you get to stay home a little bit and not have to worry about not being paid. I should be able to work from home and, still get paid.
Sure.
And I'm more
And wear a
productive.
robe
Yeah,
or
wear my
pajamas.
robe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in my basketball clothes, in my robe, and in my house shoes. And then later,
There you go.
I'll take off the robe, still wear my house shoes, and I'll go to the court. Good day.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think. Do I have any more questions? I mean, I guess my only question would be, would you ever want to come back on the show?
Oh, for sure.
Oh, for
Yeah, like
sure.
if you think
Got
of
him.
something, yeah, do you want to talk about a specific topic or whatever? Like, sure, bring me back on.
Honestly, I was thinking when we were talking about some of your other shows that you're going to be having in the future, what I might want to do is maybe months after they are done, then we can just revisit and just talk about all, because I want to go through, watch them, do some of my own research, and then we could come back, because like I said, the forensic stuff, the human trafficking, any of the other things that you have on the docket, I want to, hear that and see, like, especially the food and how it affects the mental health. That is one that I would definitely want us to revisit for sure.
We can definitely do that. And also we'll be talking about, like, there's a different episode. We'll be talking about, like, diet culture, how that ends up leading to eating disorders and stuff like that at the most extreme.
Heck yeah.
So yeah.
All that stuff will be interesting. And if we ever get the two Tories on, oh my God.
Y'all
were cracking me up. When I was listening to that, I was just like, oh snap. They about to get into it. And I'm not going to lie to you. Even though, like, behind the memes and all that, I can make the jokes all day. But, like, I would have been hella nervous to sit in there and have a conversation about sex with y'all. Like, it just, because I'll start clamming up, being like, do I want to tell people about what I'll be doing when I be, bumping rump? Oh my God. And the girls just have no chill. They just be like, yeah, I'm just in here just blop blop and then doing a blop blop and blop 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 blop. I'm like, okay. Like, even my homegirls that used to be on this show, Stephanie and Priscilla, they're two of the funniest people of all time. No shame in their game. And I just be like, man, I admire the hell out of them, because they're just like, nah, this just, it is what it is. I'm like, I'm too scared for all that. Like, I can't do doing all that. But I love listening to it, and your show is great. Hopefully there's nothing but success going forward. Yeah, I think it's gonna be dope.
Same with you.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I think everybody that I know who's, I call it all art. If you're producing any type of content, it's your art. So as we continue to produce and put out our art, like, it's something that really keeps me motivated, gets me going. Like, I'm glad that we had scheduled this. We got on, we knocked it out. It's, it's 2 hours well spent for sure. Absolutely well spent. I think this is going to be really informative. I was super excited about this, and, like, I can't wait for people to actually get to listen to it and, hear your perspectives, hear our conversation. Like, and then my last thing is this. 2 things.
Okay.
What is the best episode of The Office, and what is funnier? That's What She Said or Title of Your Sex Tape?
Okay. Best episode of The Office. I think it depends on, like, what you're wanting. Like, in one of the Office groups, they had a list of, like, watch this episode when you're feeling sad or, like, happy or whatever.
Oh, that's
if I have to say, yeah. So, like, if you're feeling sad or whatever, then watch, like, Jim and Pam's wedding or something like that. My favorite episode, though.
Andy tore his scrotum at the wedding. That's what'll pull you out of a bad mood.
I know. I still think, though, my favorite episode is, stress relief part 1. Like, I don't know how you top that. The fire drill, like, what part 2 is funny too, but, like, part 1 just kills me. And then, like, my favorite underrated line that just, like, still, I've watched this show, like, I don't know, 20 times at least, all the way through, like, maybe 30 at this point. And in the episode when they're doing, like, the murder mystery and Oscar tries to do that Southern accent, every
we can't pay
time
him.
That kills me.
We can't pay him. Or whatever he's saying, that little boy, he just stops immediately. It's like, look. He's just tired of it. God, I love that one. I just love at the end when Jim's ready to go home and Pam's in there with Michael and Andy and Dwight, and they're all doing finger guns. It's so funny.
Yes.
I know for me, stress relief is always a good one, but dinner party for me has to be the best one.
So good.
And a lot of that is because you have to think about the amount of times that Jim and Pam told Michael no to hanging out. And he set it up to where he literally faked a work thing to make sure that they didn't have plans, canceled the work thing in front of the entire group, and then caught them just to get them to come have dinner with him. And then look how it turned out. Broken plasma TV, There, the cops got called. Jim's apartment was flooded and on fire.
Yeah.
There was a candle conference. I mean,
Yeah.
and then obviously Dwight's relationship with his former babysitter. There's just so much to
There's a
unpack.
lot.
And then the whole
There's
Hunter
a lot.
thing, the Jan
Yeah.
and Hunter thing. I don't know. But Stress Relief
Yeah.
is super funny. I actually like part 2 a little bit more, but only because I love that obviously Dwight had to go to corporate 2 times for this shit.
Yeah.
And then I love how he
Yeah.
had to get all of the signatures. And then my favorite part is when he has to prepare his statement of regret, and then Jim goes,
Yes.
you couldn't just memorize that? No, I could not, because I do not feel it. And now come on up here and sign this. And then when he's like, I didn't try to kill Stanley. Like, Stanley's heart tried to kill him. He's like, no, learn a lesson from Stanley and jog on up here and come sign this.
Yes.
That part kills me every single time. And then obviously Michael, the boom roasted stuff is just, it's off the chart. Yeah. So I guess Stress Relief probably would take it because it's a 2-part thing and there's just so much. But man, the dinner party, casino,
Scott's Tots,
yes,
also equally cringy, and I love it. Yeah.
Just in the part when they're in the break room and right when Aaron goes, what is Scott's Tots? And you just hear Stanley cackling in the back. Oh my God, I'm dead every time. And just him going, has it been 10 years? I'm like, oh my God. And they show the newspaper clipping and, God, it's such a classic show. Yeah.
So good.
All right, and then the last thing, what's better? That's What She Said or Title of Your Sex Tape?
So I am biased because I prefer The Office, and I think because I've heard That's What She Said far more. I think the line Title of Your Sex Tape is more creative.
Yeah.
But I just laugh a lot more at That's What She Said.
It's always
so I
funny.
have to go with that. But like owning the fact that I do prefer The Office over Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So you can take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah. It's tough because I obviously have not watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine all the way through the amount of times I've watched The Office. So it's very different. But Brooklyn Nine-Nine, man, like once I resisted that show for years. I was like, there's no way that can be funny. And then when I started watching it, like, I think Andy Samberg is a national treasure. I just think he's stupid funny. The way he's able to convince you that he's like a genius detective, but also like the dumbest guy at the same time. And also very funny, and like he's able to play all the parts. All the characters are good. But when I first heard Title of Your Sex Tape, what made it funny was, even though they don't say it a lot, like he says it at the most like awkward times in front of like everybody. He'll say that in front of your mom, your dad, your grandparents, your boss, and it's hilarious. But then the episode when him and Amy first had sex, and when he goes, Title of Your Sex Tape, and he goes, Title of Our Sex Tape, I was like, oh, that was lit. Because how often do you get to be in that situation? So
true.
But yeah, I think it's The Office. I mean, mainly because it's with everything. Like thinking about the time when the second Michael walks into the office and sees Dwight eating grapes and goes, "That's what she said," and he's like, "What?" And he goes, "Grapes, seductive." I don't know. Just like he's just trying to find a way to put it in there. Or like when he goes out camping, and then he comes back and he's talking to Jim. And he's just like, I never know. I just say it. You're just trying to get a laugh. That's basically it. Like, you have to have a respect for that. Somebody who's just trying to keep things light and fun. And I will say I've never, ever had a supervisor that was like that. Well, my current supervisors are kind of like that, but I don't have a lot of interaction with them. I would say ones that I worked with and interacted with the most, I've never had one that like went out of their way to make sure that everybody was at least still having a good time. And I love that about Michael, because he always says we're supposed to be having fun. He does not understand that this is a job. He thinks it's family and fun, and it is. So yeah, it's tough, man. You can't really beat The Office. It's so classic. How would you feel if they did a reboot? Are you on board with that?
No.
Yeah, neither.
And I don't know how they would, because I don't know if you remember this, but like they had a big auction for like the props in the office, like
I didn't know that.
like the office space. Yeah, they had a big auction. So I'm like, even logistically, I don't know how that would happen. They're all in different locations, and I feel like when something amazing happens, people just have to keep like rebooting it. I'm like, just leave it.
Yeah,
it was
you can
perfect
just leave it alone.
how it was. I mean, that's just my opinion, but
it would just be weird.
Like,
yeah, like if Jim and Pam had to move back to Scranton, like, and then so did Mike. So these people all took steps backward in life to come back to then all work with each other. Like, nah. But I guess now, like, I thought of this the other day. The only way it could probably work now is if you did it to where it wasn't like a show about them working. It was just a show about how, because we went into quarantine, that they could still work their jobs, and they all just missed each other so much that they just stayed on the calls all day with each other, or like something like that. But then even then, it won't be as funny, because the thing that made it funny was like, your boss could never be this oblivious to the sexism, the racism, and you would never ever, especially in a time now, you would never have it where none of the, I mean, obviously they all complained about Michael to Toby, but no one complained enough to where it got him fired. So you would never have a group of people who would just accept the fact that like he's like this. I mean, obviously the people from Stanford all quit, but everybody in Scranton they just tolerated him. Stanley probably was the only person who didn't like him, and he stayed there the longest. So if Stanley could take it, they all had to. That's probably how they viewed it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Crazy.
And on my bad days, like if I'm just like, oh God, I'm really tired, or I just, I'm not in a good mood or whatever, I'll watch the bloopers from Dinner Party, because that gets me.
So funny.
They could not get through. I don't know how they got through that.
When Michael keeps touching, and Steve's touching the TV multiple times, and then you can just see how John just keeps cracking up because he can't stay in character to try to sit there and listen to him. And I love that he made that TV seem so great. And now we all just are like, anytime you see a small TV like that, you're like, oh, Michael Scott's plasma TV, because he was so proud of it.
That's what I did in my living room. Like, I had this smaller TV that I've had like forever, and so I sent like a Snapchat every time I move into a new place. Like, I send a Snapchat, and I'm like, that is a $200 plasma TV you just broke.
Good luck paying me back on your $0 a year salary plus benefits package, babe.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so classic. Yeah, you know what? January, I guess, they're taking it off of Netflix. You still planning to keep your Netflix after that?
Yeah, because Netflix still produces good content, but I don't know if I'm gonna download Peacock, the NBC streaming service, which is where it's moved to. I feel like I need to protest all the streaming services, because I feel like it's just gonna end up like cable all over again, where every channel has their own streaming service.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So yeah, I'm thinking about just getting it off Amazon Prime, which I know is hypocritical because I just said that I'm like against streaming, but I already have Amazon Prime.
You mean like buying the box set or something?
So you could do that, which would probably actually be cheaper, but you can buy the series off Amazon, like, and stream it.
That's not a bad idea. How much is it?
Yeah, I think it was like $10 or $11 per season though. So like I may do it like one season at a time.
Yeah, that's tough. I feel like I need a discount for season 1. You're not making me pay for 6 episodes. I'm not paying for that.
Yeah.
Dang, that's crazy. I didn't think about that. I didn't know they had it on Amazon. Yeah.
I didn't either.
Yeah, Netflix is definitely losing me as a customer. Mainly, they do have good content. It's nothing against them, but I only had it this long for The Office. And if you're not going to have that. A lot of people have said that. Yeah, and then you're putting my third favorite show and potentially my 5th favorite show with my first favorite show all on one network. Why wouldn't I? If you're going to have Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Parks and Rec, and The Office all at your fingertips without having to switch between apps, that's a dream come true.
True. And Parks and Rec is also a gem.
Yeah. And I wonder if they're going to have Psych on there. That's a good show. You ever seen that?
Is that NBC or is that
No,
USA?
it's a USA show, but I just wondered if maybe they would try to finesse it and
Yeah.
put that on. That would have been like, for me, I would have been like, I'll never use anything else if all of those shows would be on one streaming platform. Yeah.
I like
Gotta
too
love it.
many true crime like murder shows, so
Yeah.
Netflix is still gonna unfortunately probably suck me in.
Yeah, and see, that's what I do is I try to check in with people and be like, "Hey, do you like documentaries?" Because I love their documentaries and just kind of,
They're so good.
I like to hear like, are there any new ones? Is it worth me just like paying the money for the month to try to wipe them all out and then deleting it again or something like that? You know,
Yeah.
I do that sometimes, but yeah, those documentaries like, but Hulu, like I just pay for the Hulu shit
Hulu's
now,
good.
and then you get to I watch all of those crime shows on there. Like I can't get enough of it. I'm on break right now because some of that stuff will just drive me crazy. Because I'm just like,
Yeah.
yo, I know the husband did it. Why was taking y'all so long? Like I had it figured out 3 shows ago. Like, you know, you just get stressed out. You get too invested. So I gotta take it easy. But yeah, they definitely have some good ones on there. But no more Office on Netflix. It was a good run. Hey, that's what she said.
Yeah.
All right, Mac. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on my show. I think this is going
Thanks
to
for
be
having me.
great. Yeah, this has been wonderful. Well, I would love to have you on again. You and the two Tories. Tell the two Tories about my show. Gave them a shout out. I did want to say when I talked about you guys on my show a couple weeks ago, that show actually I did not know it because I don't go back and check the view count because it's just it's dismal. That one had over 200 views, I think. So people really liked it. They liked hearing about your show. So I hope that led to more viewers for you. Obviously, I won't know if it did, but I'm hoping that if people watched my clip, that they heard about your podcast and went and checked it out. So, and hopefully you'll see major growth and you'll blow up because I feel like the world needs a podcast like yours. Therapy related, but keeping it real. And look, all of y'all like sex, man. There's sex stuff on there. Just
This is true.
just stop fighting it. You know you love it, all right? Just watch my homie's show, listen to it, and you know, don't get too turned on. Be within reason, but allow your heart rate to get elevated. That's okay. You're an adult, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, and hopefully, you know, some of my viewers can check out your show too, especially if they're wanting like a break from the
Yeah.
nerdy research stuff.
Yeah, if you want to hear
But yeah.
somebody go crazy and just say nonsensical things, come check me out. And I have good hair. I have really good hair now. That like I'm on that
There you
this
go.
week. Yeah, my hair's never looked better because it hasn't been like this since I was like 15. So it being this big, this is crazy. Now I'm lit. So yeah, tell your friends I have good hair.
We'll do. That's important.
That's very important right now. Hey, 2020, we're trying to hang on to any positivity that we possibly can. Right now, mine is the hair and the beard. It's lit.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning into the Memechel Jackson Show. I want to thank my wonderful guests. Are you listed as Doctor? Can I just call you Dr. Mack? Do people call you that?
You can call me that if you want.
Dr. Mack. We had Dr.
People
Mack on the
haven't
show
called
today.
me that, but I hadn't thought about it.
They're gonna call you that now. We had Dr. Mack. This was an exclusive. Oh my gosh, more exclusives to come. Me and Dr. Mack. It was lit. All right, Miss Mckenna. Thank you so much for your time. We'll check in soon.
All right.
All
Awesome.
right. See you later.
Thanks.